Okay, we're on Zion Amud Beis 7b, the bottom. Oh, sorry, I'll make sure to get another Gemara.
Okay. Oh, what Gemara are we learning?
Sotah.
Oh.
7b on Sotah.
I can go in the library.
Yeah. So the Gemara said, the Mishnah said that if she admits to infidelity, so the Gemara says, Sheveres Ksubasa, she writes, it's alluded to here in the Gemara, the first line of the wide lines. Oh, before I forget, I almost forgot this. Rabbi Gintl sent me a correction. I misspoke. I had said yesterday that Reuven admitted to what he did, so that the brothers won't suspect their father. It's the reverse. I misspoke. Yaakov shouldn't suspect the brothers because it's one of a bunch of brothers that could have moved the bed, and Reuven therefore claims that Yaakov wouldn't suspect the others. Okay, I just misspoke there. Okay, anyway, so back to where we are. The Gemara says that if she comes clean, right after the whole speech, they give this whole speech trying to encourage her to come clean so that they don't have to raise Hashem's name and they don't have to give her to drink from this water. And the Gemara said, the last three lines, and the Mishnah said, Im Amra Tmeani, the second word on the third to last line. If she says, I'm impure, she admits to infidelity, etc. The Mishnah says, Sheveres Ksubasa, which means she writes a receipt on her ksuba, right? The ksuba, of course, is a contract in which the husband obligates himself to provide for his wife. That's what the ketubah is. The ketubah is the ksuba is a declaration of witnesses who declare that we acknowledge that so and so accepted upon himself to fulfill all that's stipulated in the ksuba. And in this ksuba, it stipulates his obligations to his wife, including in there is that in the event of divorce, he gives her X amount of money. It's the original prenup. It's the first prenup in some ways. But it's not really a prenup because prenups are usually to protect the husband's assets or the wife's assets. But in this case, it's meant for the husband to give money to the wife. It's meant to protect the wife, to protect the woman, so that it shouldn't be too easy for the husband to divorce her. Because from the Torah's perspective, it's all on him. He marries her, he gives her the ring, and then he divorces her by giving the bill of divorce. And if there was no consequences to divorce, he might marry and divorce every other day, and then she's just stuck. So the ksuba is meant to make it difficult for him to divorce. You can divorce her, fine, but it's going to cost you. So he thinks a little bit more before he marries her and just divorces her. And likewise, the ksuba stipulates his obligation towards her while they're married. However, if the divorce is as a result of infidelity, where she's unfaithful, so he doesn't have to be penalized because she messed up. So if she is unfaithful, then she loses her ketubah. She doesn't get the money stipulated in the ketubah. So now, if she comes clean, says the Mishnah, she has to write a receipt, which says that we are divorced on grounds of my infidelity, and therefore I relinquish my right to the ketubah. And the reason she needs to write this receipt for him is so that later on, if it ever comes to court, where she claims, I need my ketubah, he pulls out the receipt and says, no, you don't. You've already forfeited it. It's a receipt. That's what the Mishnah said, that she writes a receipt stating that she forfeited her ketubah because of her infidelity. This, of course, if she's admitting to being unfaithful. So the Gemara says, Shamas mineh, we can derive from here that kaisvin shayvar, that as a rule, a receipt is to be written. There's a big dispute, famous dispute, between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Rashi tells us about this dispute, but this is a famous dispute that comes up all over the Gemara, which is, do we require the writing of a receipt? Now, what's the reason for one way or the other? Well, let's just say a loan, right? So if I lend somebody money and I hold a contract that says, Mr. X owes me money.
Promissory note.
A promissory note, it's a contract which witnesses sign that state I gave so-and-so on X date, X amount of money. Now I hold on to this paper so that I can collect it in court if need be, right, in the Bethton. Now I come to court and I successfully collect the money, right? So now, do I have to write a receipt to the other guy saying that he paid me? Now the question comes down to, what happens if this guy wants to come and what if the other guy who I lent money to, or what if I'm sorry, come 10 years later and say, hey, you never paid me back, and I tried to claim that he owes me money again. So if he has a receipt, he can say take out the receipt and say, no, I paid you back 10 years ago. Here's the receipt.
Give him the note, give him the paper,
Which paper?
the note.
So one opinion is I write a receipt stating that so-and-so paid me back. And therefore, if I ever try to claim the money again in court, the other guy pulls up the receipt and says, no, I paid you back already. Now, the counter argument is you're making this guy hold on to receipt forever. It's not fair. He has to make sure that the official quote in the Gemara is he has to be careful that it doesn't get eaten by mice. In other words, he has to take care of this. What happens if the receipt there's a flood in his house and he loses his receipt? And I come to claim the money from him again. And now I get paid back double if I were inclined to cheat. Right? So it's not fair to make him hold on to a receipt. So how do we prevent me from collecting a second time? Quite simple. Like you were suggesting, I had a contract which says Mr. X owes me money. As soon as he pays me back, I give that note back to Mr. X. Mr. X rips it up, and I can never collect the money again because I have no contract. So do I just rip up the contract and that nulls the transaction? And that alone prevents me from ever trying to collect the money again because the note is now ripped up? Or do I have to actually write a receipt, which the other guy has to hold on to prove that he was paid, to prove that he paid up? Now, the ksuba is a very similar thing. It's a promissory note. That's what the ketubah is. I'm obliging myself to pay this woman in the event of divorce, God forbid. And does she have to write a receipt that I now have to hold on to for the rest of my life, just in case she ever tries to claim again? Now, our Mishnah seems to apply that she does have to write a receipt. So it seems like our Mishnah is taking a side in the argument here. Because the Gemara says that if she admits to unfaithfulness, she has to write a receipt stipulating that she's forfeiting her ketubah because she was unfaithful. So this seems to be taking a side in the argument that a receipt ought to be written in all cases of paid up debt. Fair? So that's what the Gemara says here. Shmamina, we can derive from here that this Mishnah is taking a side in the argument that koisvin shoiver, that as a rule, a receipt is written, which is why the Mishnah says here that she has to write a receipt. Clear?
Okay, but is the receipt written
on the actual ketubah? No, it's another paper. It doesn't say where the receipt is written.
So they don't discuss the option of just writing on the contract.
That says that it's been paid in full.
So
Maybe that's a version, but maybe
present it as
if the paper itself, in other words, you turn the paper itself into a receipt, I guess it's a possibility, but I don't know that the Gemara discusses that. It's a good question. Okay, Amar Abaye says, Tani, you can learn that instead of the Mishnah saying the words Shoveres Ksubasa, which means she writes a receipt on her ketubah, rather you can read, second to last line, Mikra'as, she rips up her ketubah. So there's a different version to the Mishnah, and it changes the law radically. In just one word, either Shoveret Ktubata, which means she writes a receipt on her ketubah, and that would fall in line with the opinion which says that all contracts need a receipt when paid up. Or you can read it Mikrat Ktubata, which means she rips up her ketubah. And that would be in line with the opinion that says that all paid up debt, you just rip up the original contract. So the dispute still stands, and then the dispute would change what word you use in the Mishnah. Yeah?
It seems like
But isn't it written in the based in?
Well,
Isn't it registered?
1 second, Alan. Go ahead.
It sounds like it's not a separate receipt that's being written. It says the language that you used was that it's written directly on the.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's written on a separate paper. Quite sure.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Alan. Sorry.
Isn't it written in the wherever she gets married in the based in or anything? Isn't it registered there?
Yeah. So nowadays we do that where the best in registers.
That's the safest thing.
But it isn't necessarily always the case that we do that. In other words, like for example, if I'm doing a wedding, I'm not part of best in. So as part of our MTC record, I'll have a record of the marriage and what happened, and a copy of the ketubah we'll keep and all that. But it's not necessarily a halachic requirement that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't necessarily always the case. And also, it's possible that a couple gets married in one city and 10 years later living somewhere else. Even if there's a record, go find it across the ocean without airplanes and emails. So it could become a problem.
Always swim.
Yeah. Okay, so Abaye says to change the word in the Mishnah, instead of saying shoveret ketubah, so that she writes a receipt for her ketubah, put the word mikrat ketubah, so she rips it up. Amalei Rava responds to Abaye, but v'hasheveres kadani. It's very nice you're changing the word, but it's not the word that we have in the Mishnah. I mean, the Mishnah says shaveret. What do you want? The Mishnah says she writes a receipt. What's this business all of a sudden you're changing the word in the Mishnah and saying that you rip it up? It says you write a receipt.
Who says that?
Rava. Rava is challenging Abaye and says, that's very nice, but you can't just change the word in the Mishnah. The Mishnah, if you had a text that had a different version, then Abaye would say, look, I found a text with a different version. But Abaye is just, what's the word? Unilaterally just changing a word in the Mishnah. So Rava says, no, but the word there is shaveres. So we have to give a different explanation, therefore. Shaveret means she gives a receipt. And Abaye changed that to mean she rips it up. And Rava is saying you can't do that. The Mishnah says the word shaveres, the Mishnah says she writes a receipt. So Elam Rava, therefore Rava says, our Mishnah, which says that she has to write a receipt, is b'makim she'ein kaisvin ksuba askinan. It is dealing with a location where the custom is not to write a ketubah. Now this could seem shocking, but the Gemara mentions a number of times that there were places apparently that they would not write a ketubah at all. They wouldn't write one, not because they didn't have the law of the ketubah, but because the marriage itself, because the sages have made it such that every marriage must have a ketubah, then whether you actually have a paper or not, you still have to collect the ketubah. In other words, they've made it as part of marriage itself, and therefore no need for a contract. Just by the very fact that you married each other, you're obligated in all the things that the ketubah would have said, even if there isn't the ketubah.
So they don't have a written one, but
they have no written paper.
no written paper.
The obligations of the ketubah are there along with the marriage, but the actual paper is no longer there. So now if that's the case, how do you ever prove that you collected? How do you prove that you collected? Or how do I prove that I paid up? So I have to have a receipt. In a location where a ketubah is written, and the very fact that no ketubah is present is proof that I paid up. Because as soon as I pay up, the ketubah is ripped up and we're done. It's over. So the fact that there's no ketubah present is itself proof that I paid. But if there was no ketubah in the first place, then the lack of ketubah isn't the proof anymore. And therefore I have to write a receipt. In other words, what Rav is saying is as follows. Ordinarily, when there's a regular contract that says I lent you money, then no receipt has to be written. The contract is no longer here. That itself is proof that it's been paid up, because I started off with a contract. Ketubah is a exception to the rule, because in the case of a ketubah, in some places, no ketubah is written at all. And therefore the lack of ketubah isn't proof that it was paid up, and therefore a receipt has to be written. So this is an anomaly.
Ketubah, it means because it's been ripped up in the places where there.
So that's right. In a place where ketubah is written as part of the marriage ceremony, then the fact that the ketubah isn't here is enough of a proof that I paid. She can't come to court and say, "Hey, pay me my ketubah." I'll say to her, "Produce the document."
So isn't that an argument for Abaye who says ripped up?
Yes. No. The question is like this: when the Mishnah says that she writes a receipt, is that a unique case to this situation, or is that a rule that receipts always have to be written? So Rabbi is saying it's not a rule that receipts always have to be written. It's only in this case that receipts have to be written because no ketubah was written.
Oh, because in some place, okay.
That's right. In other words, we started off by saying that the fact that the Mishnah says that she has to write a receipt is proof that across the board, receipts always have to be written. And not just ketubah, but anytime I lend you money and you pay up, a receipt has to be written. But now the Gemara is saying, no. Don't derive from here that receipts have to be written in every single contract. It's only in this case that a receipt has to be written. And the reason why in this case receipts have to be written is because ketubah was never written. So it's an anomaly, it's not the rule. Okay. All to say that our Mishnah is no conclusive evidence for either opinion. You could be of the opinion that the receipts are written, and then that's why a receipt is written in our Mishnah. Or you could be of the opinion that in general receipts are not written. And as for our Mishnah, a receipt was written because no ketubah was written.
Depends where you are.
Depending on which location. If you happen to be a location where there's no ketubah written, you got to write a receipt to prove that it was paid up. Clear?
So would they follow based on where they were married?
So it had to be determined based on where they were married, which is why it's very difficult when people travel. You have to know which location they came from and what the custom was there. It's very difficult to.
And what if they moved?
What if they moved? So it's become universal that we do write an actual ketubah. I don't know of any place anywhere in the world or any rabbi that would ever do a marriage without an actual ketubah contract. But it seems from the times of the Gemara that there were places that didn't do that. They just didn't write a ketubah. I guess, people weren't moving so much, and they figured, look, we have control of the whole town. Anybody who gets married through the one court. And we know that there's a ketubah, so we know who's divorced, we know who's married, and we don't have to write any papers and make people hold on to papers forever. And what if she loses it? Now she can't collect a ketubah. We know marriages come with ketubah, and that's the end of it. I guess in a tight-knit community, you can do that. Today, with an international world, you can't do that anymore, and therefore ketubahs are written as a rule.
Because the first Mishnah in Kedushin is a Isha Niknes B'Shloshat Drachim.
Okay, the contract there is not a ketubah.
Oh,
The contract in the beginning of Kedushin is not a ketubah.
really?
No. The contract there's a paper which says, I married Harei B'Kedeshesli.
Oh,
Yeah, the contract there's not a ketubah.
I always thought that the contract means Ketubah.
No.
I
No.
don't understand.
He's referencing a Mishnah which says that a woman can get married in three manners, either by giving her money, which is what we do. We give her a ring, and I say, you're married to me through this ring. Or he can give her a contract, or through consummating the marriage.
Right.
If he goes to her and says, with this act of intimacy, we are now married, and they go into a secluded room, and witnesses stand on the other side to observe that they were in the room long enough for intimacy, that's the marriage ceremony. Or, as we do it, we have witnesses which watch me give her a ring. And when I give her the ring, I say, you are hereby betrothed to me through this ring. That's the way we do it. The third option is a contract. Now, Meir was assuming, as many do, the Mishnah is referring to a ketubah, but it's not. The contract there is, he writes on a piece of paper, Harei B'Kedeshesli, you are hereby betrothed to me through this contract. In the same way I give her a ring, I give her this paper. And that would be a biblical marriage. Ketubah comes centuries after the Torah is given, where the sages institute a ketubah to protect the woman, so that people don't just easily divorce. So the ketubah is a separate paper, not to the actual marriage itself.
If you have a contract, you could still you could still get married via contract.
So we don't do contract for whatever reason, but we don't use a contract marriage. We do marriage through a ring. That's our custom. And the ketubah is a separate contract. In fact, just to give you a little bit more.
You would need both then, you would say.
Nowadays, oh yes, so if you were to get married through a contract, you have to have two contracts. One, the contract of marriage, and one, which is like instead of the ring, and one is the ketubah.
That was my thought.
Yeah, you have to have both.
Contract, would you need the ketubah?
You have to have both, yes. So in fact, the way we betroth, the language we use is, right, if you look at the Gemara in Kedushin, the tract of Kedushin, it just describes the words you say when you get married is Harei B'Kedeshesli. You are hereby betrothed to me, or you're hereby sanctified to me, you're hereby sacred to me, some language like that. But we add a few words. We say Harei B'Kedeshesli, Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. You are hereby betrothed to me in accordance to the law of Moshe and Israel. And you add those words because what you're saying is that my marriage is itself dependent on the laws of Torah. And therefore, if Torah law says I have to have a ketubah, then in those words is a ketubah. Because my marriage is conditional to the laws of Moshe and Israel.
Incorporated by reference.
Incorporated by reference, correct. Stipulated by condition, that this marriage is on condition that it follows all the laws of Torah.
Right.
And that would further explain why this is not really the truth, but it would further add, even though without this word, the idea of not writing ketubah applies in these towns, but this would certainly further add to that, give weight to that idea of not writing a ketubah, because you stipulated in the words of your marriage that you're getting married according to the law of Israel. And the law of Israel is you have to have a ketubah. So even if you didn't write one, you're still obligated by the ketubah because you're obligated by the laws of Israel, as you stipulated it when you married her. Anyway. Okay, clear? Okay, we're gonna, yeah?
You can just open a whole can of worms now.
How's that?
Because you're saying now as stipulated by the laws of Torah, so now it's like if we don't follow Torah's laws, our marriage.
No, so okay, the marriage is null and void. Yes, so that's a very good question. It's a very good question, and it is a rabbit hole we don't want to go down to. But I will just say this: it doesn't mean that if they don't keep Shabbos, their marriage is null and void.
Right.
That's not what it means. It means if they didn't do the marriage ceremony according to Torah, it would be null and void.
Okay.
Because we're making the marriage conditional on the laws of Torah in marriage.
Right.
So we're making the marriage conditional on the ketubah or other conditions. Now, there are times, this isn't really the case, but there are some times when the sages, this is a very, very rare thing, and I don't know why I'm even putting it out there, but it's just to open your mind to a whole other dimension of this marriage thing, that there are times when, because of the stipulation, we could actually undo the condition retroactively. And we could say that the condition never happened. Because the entire condition, the entire marriage moment was conditional to the law, And based on what we know about what happened at the ceremony, we can say it wasn't done accordingly, and the Kedushin retroactively never happened.
That's the
Instead of
Moshe
divorce.
That's the famous Moshe Weinstein Hindu.
No, that's Heter Meir Rabbanim. I think he's talking about Heter Meir Rabbanim. We have 100 rabbis who come together and they can undo their marriage.
Oh,
It's just a similar thing because you're getting married in accordance to the law of Israel, and here the law of Israel is coming and undoing your marriage. It's a possibility, and it's done sometimes. It's usually done, whatever. It's done under certain circumstances, basically.
right.
But it's very rare.
It's used for Kohanim, right? If they were married and you want to remarry.
So Kohanim, sometimes it's used that a Kohen wants to remarry, but they have to find some reason to undo it. In rare cases, it's done when someone refuses to give a get. In also very rare cases, it's done. Yeah, so if guys refusing to give a get, she can't get remarried. But if we undo the marriage to begin with, then she can get remarried. But it's not so simple, because if you undo the marriage, then you're rendering all the children illegitimate. If there are children, it's not a fun ceremony to do, but it's done when necessary.
It's not clean.
It's not clean. All to say that there is a stipulation in the marriage itself, the marriage be done in accordance to the law of Kadas Moshe Yisrael, in accordance to the laws of Moses and Israel. Okay, we'll stop over here, and God willing, have a wonderful day, everybody.
God bless you. All the very best, Rabbi. All the very best. Have a good day, all of you.
Have a good day.
You too, Judge.
Thank
All the best.